All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Chamber and to Amarillo College for hosting this conversation. Looking forward to it, and welcome to all of you here. I want to start, this is a conversation about data centers. It's a big topic across the state and in the Panhandle in particular. Texas already has more than 300 operating data centers in the state, with more than 100 additional projects planned or under development. We're the number 2 state for data center development right now, behind Virginia, although that may change soon. And we can talk about that. And here in the Panhandle, as of at least last fall, there were at least 4 major projects being planned in the region, including in Hall County, Gray County, Armstrong County, and of course an 18 million square foot development just outside of Amarillo that I'm sure everyone in this room has heard about and talked about. I want to start just with you, Chris, to kind of help sort of level set this conversation. Tell us a little bit about why is this demand so increasing so much, and why is so much attention for people wanting to build these data centers? Why are they setting their sights on Texas?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. It's great to be back in my hometown. I was told my colleagues get to see me on my best behavior because my mom is in the crowd. So don't worry, I'll probably be grounded after this still. Part of the reason for data center growth, first, I think we need to wind back and understand data centers have existed as a major part of our infrastructure for well over 10 to 15 years. Google's oldest data center was built in 2008. We have consistently been growing our footprint across time. It's increased electricity in particular, which is what I work on, is increasingly the largest cost to the business. And part of that is pretty simple, right? How many of you have a phone? I assume everyone here, or at least you registered online. If you're like me, I have about 15,000 photos that are completely unorganized. And our understanding of the cloud is kind of nebulous, but the cloud is a data center. That storage that used to be on our hard drives of our phone has been moved to a centralized environment. Think of like the Sam's or Costco of storage. Now, this has been growing over time generally as we continue to digitalize our services. Now, what's changed has been how we use our digital services and the data that underlines that has really increased the growth, right? So not only now can we access our medical records from anywhere, but hospital systems are finding new and innovative solutions for patients based on leveraging AI studies of data. And to do that, and to meet the next AI jump that we're looking for, AI is becoming more and more accessible to more and more different types of consumers. And that's where we're seeing the jump on we already had high load growth in this sector before. We were just able to deal with it because for the longest time, in particular, the electricity sector had a lot of excess slack. And now I think there's a lot of pressure because we were in a different environment even 5 years ago, 6 years ago, where load growth was flat, electricity was stable. We weren't worried about it. We didn't have anything but flat growth, and now we are demanding a great infrastructure push, and that infrastructure requires a lot of work to develop that we haven't had the processes or the supply chain set up for.
Okay, absolutely. And what about why these are happening in Texas? I've heard people in the industry sort of tell me it's 2 things. One is land. There's a lot of land in Texas. And 2 is proximity to energy, right? Where, the Permian Basin, of course, the massive amounts of natural gas, and all different kinds of energy development in this state. Does that ring true to you? Is that why you think we're seeing so much of it here?
Yeah, I mean, there are unique things about the Texas market and the ERCOT market that allow us to bring our own power, and therefore we can really control the energy future that this state has. But first and foremost, right, Texas is an energy state. It has always been an energy state, be that oil and gas or electricity. It's one of the largest producers of wind and solar in the country, if not the largest, I think now. It has an expansive and robust energy grid. Plus, you have the additional supply chain of a well-built natural gas system. And so all of these things are conducive to just general industrial development. The governor has won the Governor's Cup for the better part of 8 years. And it's not just because of data center growth, it's because this state has been attractive for business on a variety of policy fronts, but none the least of which is energy is available, and then we can bring our own energy to cover our costs with it, which is really nice.
Okay, so what this has done is create a situation where people are, hearing about data centers being built, proposed near their property, near their homes, near their where they do out agriculture or work in a different kind of ways. Judge Ballew, you have a data center in your jurisdiction. Tell us a little bit about that center and just what it has meant for the community, good or bad.
What we have operating there is kind of a hybrid system, and so energy-wise, it is not pulling energy currently from transmission. It's a behind-the-metering system where it is using energy that would not be put on the transmission line that's excess from a wind farm. And so all of that energy is being utilized by the data center to power their sources. In regards to water, it's a closed loop system. There is the initial water was purchased from a municipality to charge the system. And my understanding right now is there's very few gallons of loss because of it being a closed loop system. The only water usage that data center has is the water that's used for the bathroom facilities and kitchen facilities that are on site. So water usage is really not a factor there. I think the electrical factor, it was twofold for us in our community because that data center was operating on what's called a net zero. And so without federal subsidies or state subsidies, that wind farm would actually lose money. They wouldn't, because of the dispatchability onto the grid. And so by tying a data center to it, now we've created not only the data center and the value for it, but we've also created increased value for the wind farm because now they're operating on their own 2 feet. So they're profitable and not having to depend on those federal monies to get to a break-even point.
When was it built in your community?
It's been operational for about 5 months. So the total turnaround time from start of construction to finish, which was pretty impressive in itself, was done in about 18 months.
How have your constituents responded to its presence there?
We haven't had any negativity from the data center at all. With any project, with any construction project, you're going to have issues that you come across just because of the change in construction, whether it be because of debris, whether any construction project is going to have those. So we didn't have anything outside of your normal issues. And I think the one factor to that is because we put into place, we did do an abatement agreement with the company who established that. The county has limited abilities to regulate those type of things outside of an abatement agreement. So we were able to develop some things into the abatement agreement that were to refab and rebuild the roadway that they used during the construction time that was able to be done without taxpayer money. And so we were able to kind of leverage some of those things for the benefit of the community. And so it turned out very well for us.
All right, excellent. I mean, of course, it would be foolish not to acknowledge that these data centers can be polarizing, right? There are very strong supporters of them who point to the economic development potentials, the tax revenue potentials long run. And then there are people who raise questions about things like water and energy use and even things like noise and just impact in the surrounding areas. We'll get into all of those, but Dr. Garner, I want to start with the economic development angle. The development that's happening outside of Amarillo is projected to be, has been promised to be a massive data center. How have you thought about the economic impact of projects like that on this community?
Well, one of the things that's happening in the upper 26 counties is that, we don't have a lot of population growth and we don't have a lot of job growth. If you look at what is going on around the country, we're not growing at the space or the speed at other places. And so we're really being left behind. We're being left behind in technology, in education, and amenities, and in property values. So one of the things that's interesting about these data centers is, one, it kind of helps with the technology, can help with the infrastructure as kind of a byproduct. But number two is the number of jobs that it brings in. One of the most controversial subjects that I'm sure that we'll get into is water usage. One of the things that the range is really looking at, and that's being sponsored largely by the banks and some of our benefactors, is what is the economic usage and what is the economic value of water. When you look at water getting used in other types of scenarios, say for example, 95% of our use goes to irrigation, the return on that investment of a finite resource like water is relatively low and creates a relatively low amount of jobs. So what you have now is you have farmers saying, hey man, pay me the municipal rate of water for my water, and I don't have to farm at all. That's a very low amount of acres, but that changes the discussion around water, what it's used for, the economic benefits of that water, and then the long-term effects and the long-term amount of water that we have. We have to have a very sober conversation around water, saying if we currently use the rate of water that we're using, most counties that are involved in irrigation agriculture will run out of water or be very close to their saturated depth of usefulness in less than 20 years. So if we're going to keep those rural communities alive, if we're going to keep people there, if we're going to keep jobs there, we have to think about what we can trade that natural resource for that's not going to use all that water and also is going to retain those jobs and grow that area.
Okay, let's dig into the water issue. I mean, Commissioner, you as a former land commissioner of this state, have thought a lot about the natural resources here. How do you see the water question?
Well, the Texas Tribune actually put out a startling report in terms of the state projected shortfall, combining some of the comments earlier, resulting mostly from population growth. I mean, people forget we are a state of almost 30 million people, projected to grow to 40 million. By 2040, that puts a tremendous load on water supplies, particularly on arid areas of the state of Texas. But, part of my job today is to get the facts out there on water. And, this industry, I just feel like has been unfairly condemned in this respect because currently consumes less than 1% of the state's water current consumption. This past legislative session, your state senator worked tirelessly on a bill known as State Bill 7, which is undertaking a historic investment that the state of Texas is going to backstop, basically creating an infrastructure bank for Texas communities to come forward to the Water Development Board and pitch projects to either move fresh sources of water or to desalinate in some areas. There's a lot of innovation already taking place in the Permian Basin where, as you know, there's tremendous constraints on water. And I think this discussion almost is parallel to that, where I remember when I was in service, the oil and gas industry was condemned for use of water there. And in short order, they consume a lot less water because they're recycling and figuring out ways to work with produced water. In fact, in our humble practice in Austin, we know of entrepreneurs that are treating oil and gas produced water and then transferring it over to a data center because data centers really don't need potable sources of water. So I think, innovation, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. And we're going to see, I think, a lot of that, whether it's here in the High Plains or in West Texas when it comes to water. But the good news that I have to report to you is that, and I don't say this often publicly, but your legislature did a great job of forecasting not only population, but industry growth, whether it's power or whether it's water. Unlike a lot of other states, heading into this discussion, Texas is paying less per kilowatt hour than just about any state in the country because of our deregulated power market. In terms of water, as the market's prices are established, we still have we're still in a fairly good position because of SB 7. Is there a lot more work to do in terms of transparency, in terms of water consumption? Absolutely. But as Judge had mentioned, a lot of the tech that's occurring in the data center itself in terms of recycling and even almost mitigating the initial draw of water from municipal districts, it's pretty astonishing what's happening in short order.
Yeah, I want to drill down into the transparency issue because this is an issue that folks have brought up. We know because with the Fermi Center that is in development out here that they entered into an agreement, the city of Amarillo, to use between 2.5 and 5.5 million gallons of water per day. That, because it was an agreement with the public entity, we could see. But there are a lot of people raising concerns that a lot of different centers, aren't providing that transparency. So it's hard to know, right? We hear about innovations in technology, but which ones are using those innovations and which ones aren't? I mean, do you think there is room? What should that look like? And is there room for the legislature to take action on that particular issue?
So one point I would like to make is that the Water Development Board and I believe the Tribune covered this as well in terms of forecasting a water plan for Texas heading into the mid-century, that what it didn't contemplate really is and incorporate updated information on data centers. So that probably should be included heading into the next legislative session. There probably does need to be an accountability feature in terms of water consumption on site. Google's a best case practitioner where I believe site by site you can actually look up online to see how much water they're using in real time. Now, as to whether or not the legislature will require, like in real time, we don't know. But the Water Development Board probably should be authorized to have some sort of oversight function, so that the people of Texas, can know exactly what's being consumed by who, whether it's ag, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's other industrial advanced manufacturing, and yes, data centers, so that it's out there for the public to consume and there's less misinformation out there in terms of this public discussion. But all that can be resolved right now. The legislature is hearing, I think there's 4 related data center interim charges. So maybe an addition or an amendment to SB 7 could include an accountability or some sort of transparency function.
All right. Before we move on too much, I want to go back to the topic of jobs, though. Right? You mentioned that in terms of water use, it actually creates a good number of jobs compared to other comparable amounts of use. One thing we have heard from skeptics is that these are front-end jobs, right? These are construction jobs, and the actual amount of people it takes to operate the data center once it's fully functional might not be at that same level. What do you think about that case? Is there any truth to that?
I think you have to go case by case, right? We've seen some data centers that are basically don't have anybody working at them, 1 or 2 people. And some of the data centers that are going up are saying that they're going to provide hundreds of jobs. So I think you have to look at case by case on, who's occupying that data center, what's going on there. I personally would be opposed to, let's just put up a bunch of Bitcoin mining operations that use a bunch of water and don't have a closed loop. I don't think that currently that's what's being proposed by people like Google and what's going on at Fermi.
Judge, go ahead.
One thing I'd like to kind of add to that, I think the first thing you have to recognize is not every data center is right for every location. There has to be planning put into that. There are certain data centers, in the way that they're established and structured, they have no business being next to municipalities or next to housing establishments. You have to make the right choices for what's in your county and what's beneficial to the infrastructure in your county. Our facility, the majority of the employees are outside of the county. There's a rough amount we roughly have 15 to 16 employees that are employed there, but that's what was good for Oldham County, because we're a large county land-wise, 1,500 square miles, but as far as people, we have less than 2,000 people. So we don't have the infrastructure in the county to support a project that would employ 300 or 400 people. We don't have the housing, we don't have the water sewer facilities. And so I think it's each individual's location's responsibility to make a determination what is best for them and those conversations that they have with the developer that's wanting to develop in that area. So just understand there are a lot of moving pieces in these with that aspect, and also with the energy aspect, because depending on where you're located depends on what your energy sources are that you have available to you and what type of structure you have for those energy sources. So I think they're good programs, but also understand that there are way more moving parts in these data center operations and the formation of being able to establish those than I think people take into consideration.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to pause real quickly. A reminder, if you have any questions, you can submit them at texastribune.org/ask or grab. We've got one QR code on that table right there and others around the room as well. So probably in about 15 to 20 minutes, I'll start getting into those questions. They're sending them to my phone, so if you see me checking my phone, I'm not playing a game. I'm looking at those questions. But I want to get into electricity, right? This is another big topic. Data centers, some of these bigger data centers powering AI work for some of these major companies, including Google, use the equivalent of major American cities in terms of electricity. It is a major, major investment in our energy resources. First, Chris, why is that? Help me understand why they use so much power.
So we have one input into the entire operation, or one variable cost, and that is electricity. The entire data center functionally operates off electricity. How much we use can vary from site to site, both in terms of what it's doing and also the cooling mechanism, because there is a trade-off when we use these closed-loop air-cooled systems that we need to support that with electricity. It's like an air conditioner in every way. And so we have gotten really good at making chips do more with less. And that has created more demand for more products, and so that's how we're expanding our electrical footprint. Now, there are two ways we can do this, and what we're trying to do is the responsible ways. At first, we're bringing our own power, and we've preemptively brought a lot of our own power. Google's portfolio right now for contracted generation is 7.5 gigawatts, and to make that even relatable, I would say it could probably power 2 or 3 cities of Dallas in that environment. And we have brought this preemptively. Right now, our demand is less than 1/10 of it, but it will grow into that. And so we want to make sure the infrastructure is in place first and that we're paying our share first. And some of this, too, is an acknowledgement that the system is aging. The electrical infrastructure that we have today is, by and large, on average, 40 to 60 years old. It's nearing the end of its used and useful life, and is in need of significant upgrades. And so, what we're trying to do is work in parallel, both by preemptively bringing on new generation, but also seeing how we can optimize the existing system and the replacement of the existing system for better and more efficient and more reliable energy.
So this, those of us in Texas, right? The idea of adding, whole cities worth of power onto the grid can be scary. I know we are not in ERCOT land right now, but many of us remember the time back in a few years ago when a winter storm came and our grid nearly collapsed, right? And many of us spent a lot of time in the cold because of that. And so the thought of just massive, really doubling, maybe more the demand on that grid is a scary thought. Help me think this through. What does this mean for just Texas's capacity of keeping the lights on going forward?
Realistically, it's an uncomfortable conversation, right? We are doing things such as co-locating with new sites or new build sites to try and emphasize that these may have net zero impacts to the grid. We are bringing grid-connected generation so that everyone can experience this, the new power that's going on, and it's not just the data center benefiting from it, but rather the system-wide approach. And then we're really working closely with policymakers at ERCOT right now, and that's the operator for most of the Texas grid. Again, y'all are in SPP, so benefit, but I was in Austin during Winter Storm Uri. I had a number of friends staying at my place because we didn't lose power, and it is a commitment on our part that we're not going back there. And even in the last Winter Storm Fern, we backed down the load that we could back down in response to emergency conditions. So we are trying to be a responsible citizen on the grid, because it's not just our grid, it's your grid.
Commissioner, you've made the case that this could have some benefits to the grid and the economy around energy. Tell us your perspective there.
Yeah, so again, going back to that original kind of price point for Texas, we pay roughly 16 cents per kilowatt, and we're going to throw a lot of figures at you, right? Kilowatt hour, there's 1,000 of them per meg and 1,000 megawatts per gigawatt, and a gigawatt can power somewhere between 750,000 and a million homes. But we still pay half of that of California, and we pay less than states like Virginia and others. And it seems counterintuitive, but when your population grows and you put more generation on that grid, you can spread the cost out evenly. And in anticipation of this growth, the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, drafted what is known as SB 6, which basically says that anybody that is demanding more than 75 megawatts of load, of power, cannot shift that cost to everyday Texas ratepayers. So I know there's a lot of elected officials in the room. If constituents say, well, it's because of data centers, they're not allowed to do that. The shift the cost has to be borne by hyperscalers, by data center developers. Companies like Google and others have signed on with President Trump's Ratepayer Protection Pledge, which basically says that we're going to do our part to make sure that everyday ratepayers are paying what they are right now. Now, are there going to be continued growth? Absolutely. In your study, the Tribune put out an interesting report that followed ERCOT's projections, which are pretty astounding. But as a businessman, I can tell you there's a lot of speculation in the market. There are a lot of fly-by-night wildcatters, using an oil and gas term, that are trying to get in the interconnect queue and then flip what is known as powered land to other folks instead of being an authentic community partner. So, I'm glad to see companies like Google be that authentic and sincere community partners. And there's going to be a lot of elected officials and staff here that are going to have to sift through who are the good ones and who are the bad ones. But in that figure, in terms of doubling the requirement for tax, I think that's not I think a lot of that is filled with speculation and people trying to make a quick buck.
The other thing people talk about is, there's there can be a bit of a sort of not in my backyard element to this, right? Folks who, maybe live out in a rural area for a particular reason and don't want to see what feels like industrial growth coming out into their communities. Judge, I wonder if you could just sort of tell us, what is it like to have this center, what's the noise like? What's the traffic like? How has it changed, if at all, the way of life in your community?
For us, there was increased traffic and increased congestion initially through the construction phase. Now that it's completely constructed, it's to a bare minimum. They almost operate in a footprint that really doesn't have any effect on anybody around them. There hasn't been any noise issues in related, but that also comes back to the technology that's being used to cool the system, and how that is set up and how that is structured. So there were some things built into that project that eliminated those aspects of it, and all those discussions were done during the initial phases of having that conversation of the abatement agreement and placing it there. And so I think you have to get ahead of the curve and ensure you have those conversations that are best for your community. Now, when I say there's not wind noise or fan noise from the data center that's there, that same level of noise, if it's put next to a school, is probably not going to be a very great thing. But whenever you put it out in a rural area that the closest house to it is roughly a mile away, it really has no effect on the community whatsoever. And it's within the same footprint that the wind farm is in, and so it's not like there's a big change. There's already infrastructure kind of out there with it as well, and so we haven't really seen anything negative with that. But I will preface it comes back to kind of where you place them and what you do, and making good decisions in that initial conversation and development of the project.
Chris, is there, aside from the, construction jobs and jobs that are operating it, is there any benefit to having these in Texas compared to, I don't know, Virginia or South America or anywhere else?
I mean, there are sort of two fronts. One, there's the national security conversation that's going on right now, and it's where do you want your data to be operating at, and it's under the laws in which you live in, right? So American data should be on a data center located in the United States. But, Texas versus the rest of the United States, I think you have the ability to create new high-tech jobs and data center scientists and new products out in these areas where they're located at, because you start creating the ecosystem for that kind of innovation. And this innovation will perpetuate into the energy world as well, because we're building data centers, but those data centers need power plants. Those power plants need workers and technicians, and there's an energy ecosystem of jobs that goes on around these data centers. I believe right now, one data center job usually correlates to about 9 other jobs in the associated systems that are needed to sort of run it and support the population and support the data center. So the idea here, and especially, for me seeing these kinds of things in Amarillo, I know when growing up, I was like, Google will never come to Amarillo. Now I come back to Amarillo as part of my job. So my mom's thrilled. It's really interesting to see, there is an opportunity here to have AI scientists working on hardware. There is an opportunity here for us to invest in education as well. We have a number of investments in Texas schools. $1 million went to UT, another $1 million went to A&M. So we're here to be partners and really develop the ecosystem around what innovation can look like, and I think we can do that together. I'm happy it's in Texas.
All right, let's talk about the politics of this. We have an excellent person who can assess Texas politics on our stage with this. We had a report citing Comptroller's office numbers saying that Texas will dole out $3.2 billion in sales tax breaks for data centers over the next 2 years. It's a funny story of how that kind of happened. This program was created back before this major AI boom that was driving data centers. I've kind of likened it to creating this sales tax for items bought on your phone 2 years before an iPhone's invented, right? It has just exploded because there's so much more interest and demand. There's also been, as we've talked about a little bit, rural pushback in this. And you're starting to see a situation where people as varied as, State Rep Helen Kerwin, who, has a daughter as part of the Trump cabinet, to Bernie Sanders calling for data center moratoriums being constructed. You mentioned the Senate is studying this issue, particularly the sales tax issue. What's your read on the political situation here? Do you feel like there's a backlash coming? What should we expect in the legislative session here?
Well, being proud Texan and traveling the state, there is some negative feedback, but a lot of elected officials and economic developers and everyday Texans are supportive of these changes in rural, suburban, urban Texas. Should communities have the say as to whether or not a center should come? Absolutely. I think Judge's point should be spread across this great state by saying, some counties are going to be for it, others are going to embrace it, others are going to create industrial zones and create an opportunity zone for industry to come that's separated out from residential rooftops. Politically, it's interesting. Yes, Commissioner Sid Miller came out saying we're going to go for a moratorium, which is, by the way, what AOC and Bernie Sanders have called for in states like Virginia and New York. And I just think that Texas is a can-do state that's pro-growth, that is a great place to do business and should be welcoming to the industry, but authorize everyday citizens to voice their concerns. Now, in terms of the incentive structure, yes, I do think the legislature will revisit that. Chairman Huffman, who's the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, or the Finance Commission, Finance Committee, I should say, is going to relook at it, which is fine. But eliminating it, I think, is foolhardy because this is ultimately an opportunity to attract industry where, in parts of the state where it might be needed. So should we reevaluate it? Absolutely. But on a net basis, the industry is generating way more in sales, property tax, manufacturing tax, go across the list than what it takes in from incentives. So should there be a reevaluation? Yep, that's the legislator's job, what they should do during the interim. But in terms of these ideas of outright moratorium and getting rid of incentive programs, I think it's a foolhardy idea.
It was interesting to hear Judge Ballew talk about using tax abatements as a way to sort of incentivize certain things that they want out of the development. Of course, in Texas, counties have very little ability to control development in unincorporated areas. A look at the sales tax reviews as well. I wonder from the industry perspective how much these tax breaks in Texas are driving that growth. And if they were to go away, what kind of impact do y'all think that would have on the building boom here?
I mean, I think there has to be some type of tax revenue based upon the, associated development of things. I mean, one, you're taking land that was probably used in agriculture if it's in a rural environment and you're doing something else with it. So, in order for economic growth, we have to generate more dollars. And I think that we should do everything that we can do to incentivize, if we're going to bring these data centers in, how it's going to bring in tax to that city, to that school district. If you look at what happened with windmills, someplace like Vega, right? It's completely transformed what's gone on in that area. You could look at data centers kind of as a new extension of that. So, you could imagine there at some point being a lot of competition for data centers, places where they've either run out of water or, it's just too hot and dry to do agriculture, or the cow-calf population has decreased, and you could see a real boom. So I'm not forecasting this, but it would be interesting for cities and EDCs to start lobbying for data centers and trying to create, as some of you guys have said, an ecosystem around that. Because again, it's not just the data center, right? It's individuals working there, it's the power generation, and the economy that's revolves around the individuals that are moving there. So I think that there should be some type of economic play for sustainability and the development of the ecosystems that surround data centers, and really come up with some type of economic movement as to what should the data centers, people like Google, what should we be asking them to also bring to the table? For example, I know the one that's going out near Claude, right? They're having to buy additional ambulances, provide additional EMTs, things like that, because the amount of people that are coming in there. And then when the construction goes away, those amenities are maintained. Let's look at things like parks. Let's look at things like performing arts centers. Let's look and see what kind of push we can do to these people, companies that are building data centers. What extra amenities can we get out of them?
If I can add to that, we're aware that we are operating in a community. There's $30 million that Google has allocated to Texas in energy impact funding that we're going to use for things like creating resiliency hubs and other things. And I understand as someone from the Panhandle, right, our concerns around fire and the recent fires that have happened, and they can be really destructive to whole communities. And our hope is to help participate in the solutions for those.
Okay, so we have a lot of audience questions, so I'm going to launch into them now. And I'm going to start with one from Jeff, who I'm going to paraphrase, it's because it's long, and he's frustrated that I have not gotten into the existential questions of AI, right? Like he says the potential catastrophic impacts of AI at its intended reach and impact, talking about how do we reconcile all this talk with the very real downsides already impacting entry-level employees and our college-level graduates. Should we be building all this AI infrastructure if there are all so many people worried about how AI could destroy everyone's jobs or, become so dangerous and out of our control that it leads to major problems? How do you think about that issue? Anyone?
I'll jump in there. There was a quote, and there was a guy that was bringing in a backhoe, and he goes, "Why are we bringing in a backhoe to dig this ditch? Why don't we just have guys do it with shovels? We're gonna destroy jobs." He's like, "I got a better idea. Let's give them teaspoons," right? So, thinking about this from an agricultural perspective, if you own a feedlot or a dairy, you were reliant 20, 30 years ago on cowboys. Someone had to have a lot of knowledge and say, if this animal is down, is it sick? Is it just resting? Is it giving birth? Is this birth taking longer than it should? Do we need to pull it? Do we need to treat it? Now you're replacing those jobs. First of all, you don't have any applicants for cowboy jobs anymore. No one has that experience. Nobody wants to be out in the cold doing it. So one of the things that the range is helping some dairies do is put in AI camera systems. And what we have determined is that we can pull an animal about 3 times faster due to sickness or having an issue with calf birth, or get it sorted for repro or something like that. So the amount of efficiencies that we've gained in agriculture, if you look at the pesticide usage from like the smart See and Spray that John Deere is doing, it's reducing pesticide usage in those applications by over 85%. So I think you have to kind of meter the dangers of what AI could do, because they're real, right? Or the jobs that they're replacing. A lot of those jobs, you know, are something that need to be replaced, and that person that is doing that job needs to do something of higher functionality. Let's take McDonald's, for example. It's like, do you really need a person to say, I need a Big Mac and a Coke? Or could you say that to a computer, right? Someone's still got to be doing that. And the person that was doing that can say, for instance, go to Amarillo College now and become a computer engineer. So I think we have to be a little bit more flexible in our mindset and saying, what are the cases where AI is actually useful, is getting people out of harm's way? I'll take another example. You know, the person that cuts ribeyes in a packing plant, over time, if they do that for 35 years, there's a high likelihood that they're going to lose 1 or more of their fingers, right? That can be done with a computer, and you can always get a 3/4 inch or 1.5 inch ribeye to the millimeter, right? That is a job that could be replaced, and that person would be more than happy to stack ribeyes that are now wrapped, right? Get out of the cold, whatever. So I think we have to look in all cases as what is the use of technology and what type of jobs that are in harm's way that we can replace and get more efficient.
All right. A question: if there's a continued transition of farm and pasture land converted to land for data centers, what happens to the food demands? You know, this land is often agricultural, being converted into data centers, but isn't, you know, maybe it doesn't create as many jobs, but it is, of course, important for our economy in different kinds of ways.
Most of our land under irrigated cultivation is not actually going to food, right? A lot of the land that's in corn right now is going to ethanol, which, you know, you can have your priorities on that. But the idea of pumping water out of the aquifer to grow something that makes ethanol that's, you know, less efficient for powering cars and trucks than petroleum, which we seem to have an excess of, is kind of insane. So, you know, again, I think when we look at this over the next 100 years, let's take a longer window than saying what's going to happen in the next year, right? The average age of a farmer is, you know, 60, 65 years old. So what's going to happen in the next 35 years? I think we ought to be thinking about, when we're talking about cultivable irrigation, is what do we need to be growing for food, right? If we're growing food, you know, let's face it, we're not going to grow lettuce and herbs and strawberries, you know, in Briscoe County. It ain't going to happen, right? You could put that in greenhouses, use 1/10 of the water, and get something like $100,000 per acre. So I think we have to be thinking when it comes to agriculture about efficiencies. I'll give you one more example. Is everybody was very concerned about ranch land and what was happening with the cow-calf operations. Well, the dairy industry has a captive cow-calf operation, and what you've seen now with you know, hybrid genetics is they're breeding back the low-producing dairy cows to Black Angus, and that actually is a better grading animal that performs better and has better health. So I think we always have to keep in mind the role of innovation as it relates to efficiencies in agriculture. There should always be room for people to participate in agriculture, but like I said, we don't have to be digging things with shovels now. You know, and that will increase the longevity too of the American farmer.
A question from Angela from Amarillo about the closed loop system for water. She says you can only filter so much. Then what do you do with the essential like waste or byproduct? Like eventually you have to dispose of some of this water and what's been filtered out, right? What happens to that?
You want to answer that? You can start. The one thing I would say, the easiest way to explain the closed loop system is just like a radiator in your car. How often do you change the fluid in the radiator in your car? I'm driving a vehicle that's 10 years old that hasn't never had it changed. So I don't know. The only way I can explain that is it's not something that has to be changed out. You're going to have a small amount that is lost due to minor evaporation, or if there's a leak. If there's a leak, they're going to have to add to that. But outside of those factors, you don't have a loss. It's not something that needs to be changed out.
Yeah, I'll say there's really just the front end flushing and injection of water, and then the rest of it is flat. We don't really reuse or need much more water in the closed loop air cooled systems.
Stephanie from Pampa asks, how will data centers make sure that the commute to and from work will be safe and reliable, meaning paved roads, street signs, and traffic control measures?
Well, I think the judge mentioned it in the tax abatement agreement. So it is part. So one of the things I want to emphasize is, especially Google, we come in very, very early in the community negotiations and really spend a lot of time asking questions about what is needed. In part, right, this has to be an investment that works out to make the data center happen. And so infrastructure must be upgraded to accommodate that. And that's where we work with the counties or the cities, depending on where these are to identify what are those infrastructure needs that need to be changed or upgraded, and how can we optimize that, whether it's on your normal growth or your growth with us. You know, there's a lot of infrastructure that goes in that needs replacement for the data centers, and we are not unaware of it as Google. And so we start asking questions back to the communities that we're in, saying, well, if we wanted to do this, how are you thinking about this? And it's an engagement. I would say we probably spend, Andrew might get me here, I think we spend about 3 years to 2 years in advance of any sort of signs of construction or anything having these conversations.
All right, thank you. Kyra from Amarillo asks, how will this affect the Ogallala aquifer on a long-term basis? Especially, she notes, if it is currently being depleted 6 times faster than it's being replenished.
I would probably go right back to what I said previously. We're not pulling from there. I don't. It's a very minimal amount. If that percentage is where it is now, I don't know that a data center is going to increase or decrease what that percentage is. Whenever you look at the total picture of it, you might.
Yeah. I want to maybe frame this a little bit different. Google makes significant water recharge investments in the communities. There's 2 that are involved with our Midlothian and Red Oak facilities in the Trinity River system that we've invested in. There are several throughout the United States. You can find them on Google's sustainability portfolio. We are looking for ways to also think about water in the Panhandle and as it relates to the Ogallala. And so we've been working with the Public Utilities Commission in particular, but also, you know, there's a survey by the Water Development Board as well that we're looking to get engaged with. And I think as we have this conversation going forward, we'll continue to be engaged with state policymakers on how to think about the water situation. Because again, it's not just the data center that needs it, it's the people who need water. And y'all will work, or you know, some of them will work at our data centers. And so we need to make sure this is an ecosystem.
And I think whenever I mention that there's a lot of moving parts, part of that is whenever you talk about the data center specifically, the water usage conversation is going to be different than whenever you're talking about the energy source that is supplying the data center. That's going to be a totally different conversation in regards to water and water usage than what specific to the data center is, if that makes sense.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to ask, we're right at 1 o'clock. I'm going to ask 2 more questions and then we'll wrap it up, but we'll try to be quick here. Jeff from Amarillo asks, can you expand on the national security value of having a robust AI and data infrastructure?
So the United States is not the only one trying to develop advanced AI. There is significant growth and success in growth in China, and you saw this in some of the AI models that they have released. Where they are really succeeding at is in their energy infrastructure being used to support that. They have built by and large a landslide of the new energy infrastructure that's been built globally. And so this is an initiative that's been both passed down by the federal government as we need to start being ahead, or we need to maintain our lead in advanced data computing. But also I think when if we look at the various debates around data usage and foreign actors, I think there is a general preference that that data may remain on the United States and run on United States platforms.
All right, excellent. And one last question. Beyond whether a data center is approved or not, what does a community accountability look like once a data center is operational?
Restate that.
Essentially, how can you, once the decision is built, how can you make sure that the data center is living up to its promises and not being harmful to a community?
I can't speak for every data center developer and operator out there. I can only speak for Google, and I can really tell you the places where we have operated a data center, we have a really positive relationship with our community. One of our oldest data centers or largest data centers is in Pryor, Oklahoma, which is not super different from an Amarillo-style environment, and we have significant investments in their school systems. We're a major part of the economic workforce in much the same way, Pantex might be one out here. And so I will say, once we get involved in a local community, our staff is part of that local community, our people are part of that local community, and y'all start, becoming part of the one greater Google for our purposes. So I think maybe another way of stating this is, we invest funds in local infrastructure and local development. We listen to the community stakeholders. We have forums like this to try and make ourselves more accessible, and we're getting better and better at it. We have not historically been super great, and I will own up to that. But we are trying to reach out and understand now and hear from y'all. And so these questions that y'all have provided are really important. We take them back, we take them very seriously, and we don't think it's just going to stop at this one forum and be done. We will continue to engage with you.
Okay, well, I want to say thank you to everyone for your great questions. Sorry we're not able to get to all of them. And thank you to this panel for answering them and for being here. It's been a good conversation. And that will wrap it up for us today.